Hi, I'm Dave Vickers and welcome to the Photo Show. In today's episode we're looking at the difference between JPEG and RAW files. Remember, if you like what you see on the Photo Show, please comment, like and subscribe in the boxes below. Let's get on with JPEG versus RAW. JPEGs and RAW files. Let's have a look at what the differences are between the two files and the pros and cons of each. Now, before we start, I'm not going to tell you what you should shoot. If you want to shoot in RAW, that's fine. If you want to shoot in JPEG, that's fine. I don't have a t-shirt that says you should shoot in a specific type of file. But what I want to do is to show you the advantages and disadvantages of both file types. Now, to let you know, I shoot in both files. I'll shoot JPEGs and I'll shoot RAW, depending on the situation and depending on the finished output of what the image is going to be. If I'm shooting a 1,000-shot wedding, the majority of those images are going to be on JPEG, just because of the ease and the amount of file space that it takes up. If I'm in difficult lighting situations and there's things that I'm looking at thinking that it'd be easier to fix in post, then I'll shoot in RAW because that's giving me more latitude to work with. So what's the difference here? JPEGs tend to be a smaller file size, so they take up less space on the memory card. RAW obviously is a larger file size and it's going to take up more space on your memory. JPEGs can be worked on in any program. They'll open up in any editing program, whereas RAW needs specific programs to open it. Things like Adobe Lightroom, Camera Raw, and the basic RAW software that comes with your camera normally. So let's have a look at what we've got. Let's say this is the memory card of your camera and you're shooting in JPEG. Now, when you press the shutter, your camera's going to record all of the information of the settings that you have within your camera. Your white balance, your sharpening settings, your noise reduction settings, any picture profiles that you've put in there. And it's going to put together an image file for you. And it's going to lock it together and save to the card the image file. Now there's a whole bunch of other information that it's taken to make this file. And what it's going to do, it's going to discard the bits of information that aren't relevant to give you the basic image file. But that's locked in now, so that's why it's a smaller file size, and that's what records to your memory card. RAW, on the other hand, will do exactly the same. It will put together an image file for you, recording all of the information and the settings in your camera, and it will put together the image file, very similar to the JPEG. So we've got the image file as we have with the JPEG. But what it will also do is put together all of the information that was discarded when the JPEG was made, such as the white balance, your exposure settings, sharpening, shadows and highlights. And it will give you this as another file. This is why it's taking up more space. So basically, once you open this up within a program, not only have you got your image file, but you've also got a lot of other information that you can still adjust and work from as if you were adjusting it within the camera at the time you were taking it. Let's jump over into Photoshop and have a look at a JPEG and a RAW file and show you the difference and what you can do with each one. Right, so we're in Photoshop now, and what I want to do is show you two files, one a JPEG and one a RAW file, and they were taken consecutively. The JPEG and the RAW were taken exactly the same time. They're one shot after the other. So let's start by opening up the JPEG file within Photoshop. So here's the JPEG file I'm looking at. As you can see, it's 0069. The RAW file before it is 0068. So let's open that up now. And there's our JPEG file from when we did the car trail shoot in Photoshop. And there's issues. It's very bright here in the car trails here. It's very dark in the areas here around the houses, and here we're losing a lot of detail in the image. Because basically all the information is locked in. So let's go for a basic levels adjustment. And we can see for the histogram that we can bring the blacks in a little bit and darken it down a touch. The highlights here, we can see there's already a spike. There's already clipping on the highlights, which I'm taking is going to be in this area here with the car trails. And if we start to move that in to brighten up other areas, that's just going to blow out and we're just losing detail there. We're not really bringing detail back into these areas. Put that back. Let's try the mid-tones again. And again, it's starting to brighten it up, but we're losing a lot of contrast here. It's losing the punch and becoming a much flatter image. So let's cancel that out and we'll try with a curves adjustment. So we'll do Control and M, bring up your curves, and we can again bring in the blacks there and punch that in, and start to adjust areas here to see if we can bring out more detail. And that's working a little better, but we're still blowing out the highlights here, and without going into using layers on the image or anything like that, we're going to struggle to get the most out of this image. So let's leave that as it is there and open up the RAW file. So we'll go back up to File and Open, and here's our RAW file, and you can see you get no preview. It's just because it's shot on a Nikon, it comes up as an NEF file, which is a Nikon electronic file. So we'll open that up now, and what's going to happen is it's going to open it up in a separate program. RAW files will not open directly up in Photoshop. It's going to open what's called Camera Raw. So it will take a little while for it to click through, because it's actually going to open a separate program that is based within Photoshop to open this file. So you've got a little buffering there, and there we are. So this is now Adobe Camera Raw, and you can see very similar image. We're getting information on the camera it was shot on. We've also got the settings up here. It was at f22, it was at 13 seconds, ISO 100, and the lens I was using, which was the 17 to 55, and it's telling me at that point it was at 48mm. So we've got more information already, and you can see here we've got a bunch of sliders saying white balance, temperature, tint, exposure, contrast. It's giving us a lot of options here to start playing with the image. So let's start with the exposure. If you grab the exposure slider and start to bring it up, you can see we can start to really pull the exposure of this image up. So let's bring the exposure of the image up about half a stop. So we've come up half a stop of exposure from the original. It's flattened it out a little bit, so let's go down here to where we have the black slider, and let's bring the black slider down a touch, and that's starting to put a bit more weight into the image, but we're still keeping the areas and details here. So let's go, now we've got highlights. So the highlights, we have areas here where the whites are starting to blow out. If you grab the highlight slider and start to bring it down, you can see it's starting to bring more detail back into the area. Because the RAW file contains all of the information from the camera, you can start to adjust it as if you were adjusting it at the time you shot it. So, okay, so that's given us the whites back there. We've got detail now in there. Let's look at these shadow areas here. And again, strange enough, we've got an option here that says shadows. So if we start to bring that up, you can see that it's starting to bring detail through that wasn't it there originally into these areas. You can start to see areas of the bush there, and there was no way we could have got this with the JPEG file that we started with. Again, probably just add a bit more weight back into it. So come back down on the blacks again. Then you've got things like clarity. This you've got to be careful with because it can start to mess with the image, but if we bring the clarity up a little bit there, and vibrance and saturation if you want to adjust the colors. Now, one thing with RAW files is that it applies neither any sharpening nor any noise reduction. So if we come along here to this tab here that says detail, it's represented by two triangles here. So if we click that, we've now got another bunch of options. Sharpening at the top here and noise reduction here at the bottom. Let's start with the noise reduction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into this image to 100%. I'll just do it from the drop down there, 100% there. And now we're in the image at 100%. And because it was shot at quite a low ISO, well, it's the lowest ISO we could do, there's not masses of noise in this. There's a little bit of digital noise. This is at 100%. It's not huge, but if you grab the luminance slider, start to bring it up, you can see that smoothing out. You really need to do this at 100% on the image because any further out and you're just not going to see the detail there. But let's take that back to where it was. and look around this area here, you can see a little bit of digital noise, and if we move the luminance slider up, you see it soften out, and it's basically just, it's blurred it slightly so it's less visible. And now you've got luminance detail, so we can bring that up, and that will start to add a little bit the edges back in, so the blurring effect is less. Luminance contrast, which will add a bit more contrast and add that shape back into it. And then if you had color noise within it, which little speckling color bits, which you sometimes get in darker areas, which I'm not seeing on this image, you've got two sliders here to adjust that as well. So let's move up to the sharpening, and you can see you've got the sharpening. If we pull the sharpening up, it's going to begin to start sharpening parts of that. We can pull it, and again, now you can see that we're starting to get that noise back in, because we're kind of fighting against each other here. We've taken the noise out with the luminance, but we're adding a little bit back in with the sharpening. But one of the things you can do with this is this at the bottom where it says masking. If you hold down your Alt key while clicking that, it'll all go blank, and as you slide it up, it'll start to mask out the areas. The areas in black are being masked out. So basically what we're doing is just leaving the sharpening on the edges of areas. So let it all go now, and you can see now that we've sharpened that up. Let's put this back to normal view, which I think is 25%. There we go. So we can take off the preview of what we've done. There. Okay, we need to be in that. So that's how we started with the image, and that's where we've got to with the image by using just the RAW program. So that was the original shot. It's quite flat. That's one of the things, because the RAW file doesn't add any contrast or sharpening or noise reduction to it. It's quite a flat looking image, and it can be a bit disappointing when you first open up RAW images that they don't look as vibrant and punchy as JPEGs, because the information isn't locked into it. It's up to you to pull the best out of the information. So let's click the preview back on, and you can see that's quite a difference with the two files. So if I'm going to click open image, this will now take this image into Photoshop. You can see it says reading camera raw format, so it's now going to open that image within Photoshop so that it can be either further worked on if there's areas that you want to touch up, or you can now save it and export it as a JPEG file. So let's come back to this. Let's get both these images down on the page. And so there we go. We've basically got both the images at roughly the same size. And the one on the left here is the JPEG image that we worked on using just the curves adjustment within Photoshop. Didn't go into any layers. This one on the right hand side here is worked on from the RAW image, and you can see how much more detail we've managed to get into the shadow areas here, how much more detail we've got in the highlight areas here. Yeah, we're starting to blow out and we're losing areas here. Here you can see a definite definition between the road and the light source. And basically on an image like this, the amount you can work on the image and get the detail back out from a RAW is far, far more than you could ever from a JPEG.